The family who vanished in Death Valley. In the sweltering summer of 1996, a German family of 4 set off on what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a road trip across the American West. Their final destination? One of the harshest, most unforgiving landscapes in the country. Death Valley. They were never seen again. Egbert Rimkus, a 34-year-old architect from Dresden, Germany, landed in Seattle with his girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, her 4-year-old son Max, and his own 11-year-old son George. They were eager, hopeful, and prepared. Or so they thought. After a brief stay in Southern California, they picked up a green 1990s Plymouth Voyager rental van in Los Angeles and began driving east with plans to explore Death Valley National Park. But something went terribly wrong. On July 22, 1996, temperatures in the region soared to a brutal 124 degrees Fahrenheit. Undeterred, the family ventured into the desert, buying German-language guides from the Furnace Creek Visitor Center before choosing to camp in their van instead of paying for a hotel. It was a decision that would prove fateful. Days passed. No one heard from them again. By July 27th, the rental van should have been returned. It wasn't. Weeks turned into months. Finally, in October, search crews discovered the green van abandoned in an extremely remote area of the park, miles off any paved road. The vehicle was locked, bottled water remained inside, personal items were untouched, but the family was gone without a trace. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, no answers. For over 13 years, the case remained ice cold. Then, by pure chance, 2 hikers wandering off-trail stumbled upon something buried in the sand, human remains. DNA testing confirmed the worst. At least some of the missing had been found. But the mystery still haunts investigators. What happened out there? Did they get lost and succumb to the deadly heat? Was it a tragic mistake? Or is there something far more sinister hiding in the shadows of Death Valley? This isn't just another missing persons case. This is the story of Germany's lost family, a dream vacation that turned into a nightmare and exposed the terrifying power of one wrong turn in the desert. That night, the family set up camp in a remote area known as Hunaupa Canyon, not far from Telescope Peak. The next morning, July 23rd, they packed up and set off to explore deeper into the desert. Along the way, they stopped at various scenic points, snapping photographs with a 35mm Praktica camera, capturing what they believed were memories of a dream vacation. But the dream was already slipping into something far darker. Investigators later uncovered an entry in a visitor logbook at Warm Springs Mine, a site deep within Death Valley, miles from any main road. Dated July 23rd, the note was written in German and simply read, "We are heading over the pass. Connie, Egbert, George, Max." The pass they referred to is believed to be Mengel Pass, a dangerous, rugged trail known to seasoned off-roaders, but completely unsuitable for a standard minivan like their Plymouth Voyager. What looked like a shortcut on their German guide map was, in reality, a treacherous, unforgiving trail meant only for high-clearance 4x4 vehicles. They were driving straight into a trap, and they didn't even know it. At some point, they also made it to a geologist's cabin in Butte Valley, where they impulsively took down an American flag as a souvenir, perhaps a harmless act in their eyes, just tourists collecting mementos, never realizing how symbolic and chilling that act would become. As the sun blazed overhead and temperatures soared past 120 Fahrenheit, the family kept pushing forward. Their guidebook pointed them to what appeared to be a quicker route back to the valley floor, through something labeled Anvil Canyon. But what they couldn't know was that this wasn't a road at all. It was a long abandoned mining route, barely recognizable, completely impassable for their vehicle. That wrong turn sealed their fate. By the evening of July 23rd, they were stranded, trapped in one of the most desolate, punishing environments on Earth, with no way to call for help, no cell service, and no chance of being rescued in time. They were supposed to fly home to Germany on July 27th. But there were no airport records, no hotel checkouts, no credit card transactions, no sign they ever left the United States. Back in Germany, Egbert's ex-wife Heike Weber grew increasingly worried when her former husband and their son failed to return. She reached out to authorities, but her concerns were lost in a bureaucratic maze. There was no crime scene, no confirmed disappearance, no proof of foul play. And since the family had entered the U.S. legally, There was nothing preventing them from simply vanishing by choice, at least in the eyes of the system. It wasn't until October 21st, 1996, nearly 3 months after their last known sighting, that the rental van was found. It was buried deep in a forgotten corner of Death Valley, far beyond where any sane traveler would go. The doors were locked, the supplies mostly untouched. There was no sign of life, and still no sign of the family. The vehicle had been left behind, but the people inside it had simply disappeared. What happened next would baffle investigators for over a decade, and the mystery wouldn't begin to unravel until 2 unsuspecting hikers, years later, took one wrong turn of their own and uncovered something the desert had tried to keep hidden. It was pure chance that led to the first real break in the case. While on a routine aerial patrol, Death Valley National Park Ranger Dave Briner scanned the vast desert below for signs of illegal activity, mainly hidden drug operations that sometimes took root in the park's most remote corners. But what caught his eye that day wasn't a grow site or makeshift camp. Near Anvil Canyon, just over 2 miles downstream from Willow Spring, something looked completely out of place. There, in the middle of an abandoned mining trail where no vehicle should be, sat a van, weather-beaten and motionless. It wasn't the rugged off-road type you'd expect to see this far off, no. It was a green Plymouth Voyager minivan. Briner's instincts kicked in immediately. This was wrong. Very wrong. The area had been designated as official wilderness territory since the 1994 Desert Protection Act, which meant vehicles were forbidden, and the old mining roads in the region had been closed and forgotten since the mining crash of 1907. When the helicopter touched down, Briner approached cautiously. 3 tires were completely flat. The van was locked. Sand had piled around the undercarriage, clearly showing desperate attempts to drive it free. But the axles had sunk deep into the dry earth, immobilizing the vehicle, probably for weeks, maybe longer. Where were the passengers? Briner radioed for backup. Soon after, California Highway Patrol ran the plates. The result was chilling. The van had been reported stolen by the Los Angeles Police Department on September 10, 1996. But it wasn't theft. The van belonged to Dollar Car Rental and had been leased to 4 German tourists, missing since July. More questions than answers began to emerge. If they'd been stranded since late July and had no reliable shelter or sufficient water, the brutal heat of the desert summer would have left them with only hours, not days, to survive. The next day, October 22nd, park investigator Eric Inman arrived by chopper to begin a detailed forensic inspection. Apart from the boot prints left by Briner the day before, the sand around the van was eerily untouched, not a single other footprint. What Inman discovered inside the van painted a chilling portrait of a vacation gone terribly wrong. Luggage was stacked in the back, children's toys were scattered across the seats. A 35mm camera lay on the floor alongside rolls of undeveloped film. Beer bottles, a bottle of bourbon, sleeping bags, camping gear. One of the German guidebooks they'd purchased at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. But there were also signs that the family had ventured much farther off course than anyone imagined. In the back of the van was a folded American flag, the one they had reportedly taken from the geologist's cabin in Butte Valley. Food wrappers, human waste in the nearby brush. All evidence that the family had spent at least one harrowing night at the site. At nearly 3,000 feet above sea level, temperatures on July 23rd, the day investigators believed they became stranded, would have peaked around 107 degrees Fahrenheit, with nighttime lows near 79 degrees. Survivable if you had shade and water. Fatal if you didn't. The van was carefully extracted from Anvil Canyon on October 23rd. What followed was the largest coordinated search and rescue operation in Death Valley's history. An urgent race against time, heat, and shifting sands to uncover what really happened to 4 travelers whose dream vacation had turned into a desperate struggle to survive in one of the most merciless places on Earth. October 23, 1996. As dawn broke over the scorched horizon of Death Valley, a massive search and rescue operation roared into action, the largest in the park's history. What had started as a routine missing persons report had now escalated into a full-scale desert mobilization. With the discovery of the abandoned Plymouth Voyager, hope for a rescue had already dimmed. Everyone involved knew the truth. After 3 months lost in the desert, this wasn't a rescue mission. It was a recovery effort. The first boots on the ground came from the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group. They were soon joined by expert trackers from Indian Wells Valley Search and Rescue. Then came 8 mounted units from the Kern County Sheriff's Mounted Search and Rescue Team, equipped with horses trained to navigate rugged terrain where even off-road vehicles failed. From the wrecked van in Anvil Canyon, search teams fanned out like spokes on a wheel. Each group was assigned a different quadrant of the unforgiving wilderness, baking cliffs, sun-bleached valleys, and bone-dry canyons that hadn't seen footprints in decades. On the very first night at around 1 a.m., a chilling clue surfaced. Roughly 7 miles east of the stranded van, a member of the China Lake team spotted something strange. A single beer bottle, half buried in the sand beside a scrubby bush. Nearby, someone had cleared a patch of dirt to sit, leaving behind a worn indentation in the earth, almost like a shallow seat carved from desperation. The bottle matched the ones found in the minivan. This solitary piece of evidence suggested that at least one member of the family had walked away from the van, heading east, possibly in search of help. But from there, the trail went cold. No footprints, no clothing, no bones, nothing. Day 2 brought even more boots on the ground and in the air. Search crews from Nye County, Nevada, and Inyo County, California arrived with fresh eyes and fresh equipment. 2 helicopters sliced through the desert sky, rotor blades thundering as they scanned the barren landscape for the slightest sign of life or death. The search grid expanded. Anvil Canyon, Warm Spring Road, Mengle Pass. Every route between the isolated canyon and the main valley floor was examined in painful detail. These weren't just weekend volunteers. These were veteran searchers, men and women with decades of desert rescue experience. They knew how to read the earth, how to find the faintest sign that a person had once passed through the sand, the stones, the heat. They checked every wash, every cave, every crevice where a frightened family might have sought shelter. But the desert, ruthless and silent, gave them nothing. On October 25th, teams pushed even further. 1 unit searched the harsh corridor between Anvil Canyon and Badwater Road. A second group from Victorville scouted the far southeastern edge of the valley. A lone ranger from the Bureau of Land Management checked the remote slopes west of Mengle Pass between Barat and the infamous Barker Ranch. Other teams poured into Butte Valley, crossing jagged terrain from Anvil Canyon. Willow Spring was thoroughly scoured by Indian Wells. China Lake teams pushed north and west from the very center of the canyon, but still nothing. No clothing, no gear, no remains. It was as if the desert itself had swallowed the family whole, leaving behind only sand, silence, and questions no one could answer. And then for years, that's all there was. Silence. October 26, 1996, the 4th and final day of the official search. The sun rose once again over the lifeless hills of Death Valley as search crews pressed on in the face of near-certain tragedy. The hope of finding survivors had all but vanished, replaced by the quiet resolve to bring closure, if not answers. Teams from Death Valley National Park pushed deeper into the northern reaches of Warm Spring Canyon and the abandoned mining outposts that dotted the rocky slopes, places where someone desperate might have taken shelter. The Victorville unit focused their efforts on the area around Stripe Butte, sweeping the desert floor in grid patterns while Lake Mead searchers covered the same region along the Warm Spring Canyon Road. Farther west, a Bureau of Land Management team scoured the rugged terrain surrounding Mengle Pass, checking every old trail that might have once led to Barat. Meanwhile, the seasoned Indian Wells team investigated freshly found boot prints near Westside Road. Prints faint and wind-worn, but possibly human. A newly deployed unit from Apple Valley swept northward along Westside Road, following the possibility that the lost family had attempted to make their way toward civilization in their final hours. Above them all, 2 helicopters continued to scour the skies over Anvil Canyon, its southern ridges, and the arid jaws of Anvil Canyon. But the winds picked up. Harsh desert gusts that scattered tracks, erased footprints, and made air surveillance nearly useless. With no new clues since the lone beer bottle discovered on the first day, and no other sign of human presence, the grim decision was made. The search was officially called off. A spokesperson for Death Valley National Park confirmed that over 250 people had participated in the massive operation. Skilled professionals, veteran trackers, aerial teams, mounted units, and still, nothing. The effort had been strategic and exhaustive, but it yielded no trace of the missing German family. The mystery of their disappearance was now a permanent fixture on the growing list of America's unsolved desert vanishings. Then came the theories. Wild, complex, sometimes downright fantastical. One rumor claimed Egbert Rimkus had attempted to make contact with the nearby China Lake Naval Weapons Center, a top-secret military installation known for testing advanced propulsion systems. According to the theory, the family had been intercepted, either recruited into a classified black project, or eliminated for seeing something they weren't supposed to. What made the theory gain traction was Egbert's profession. He was an architect, and speculation swirled that he had a fascination with cutting-edge technologies. But those who knew him dismissed it as nonsense. Egbert wasn't a spy. He wasn't some covert asset. He was a father, on vacation, hoping to give his son a taste of something bigger than their everyday life in Dresden. But in the silence left behind, the story took on a life of its own. And for years, it remained just that, a story, a mystery, an open desert wound with no answers. Until one day, long after the world had stopped looking, two hikers stepped off a trail they weren't supposed to and stumbled upon something the desert had hidden for far too long. As the years dragged on with no new evidence, new theories began to take root, some strange, others deeply unsettling. One theory suggested that the family had orchestrated their own disappearance. Former co-workers of Egbert Rimkus recalled him talking about starting over in Costa Rica, fantasizing about a new life in a distant land. Maybe, some speculated, Death Valley was chosen on purpose, a place so remote, so inhospitable, that no one would question a presumed death there. But this idea had holes. Why risk the lives of two children, especially a 4-year-old, for an elaborate hoax? And even if they had somehow escaped into a new identity, how could a family of 4 vanish completely, without a single trace, for over a decade? That led to another, darker possibility: foul play. Some believed the family may have encountered danger in the desert, criminals running drug labs, human traffickers, or simply deranged individuals who saw vulnerable foreign tourists as targets. Death Valley's vast emptiness would offer the perfect place to destroy evidence. No witnesses, no cameras, just heat, rock, and silence. But while the mystery faded from the headlines, it didn't fade from everyone's mind. In 2009, 13 years after the van was found, Tom Mahood, a former search and rescue volunteer with Los Angeles County, stumbled upon the story while browsing old case files. He wasn't a detective. He was an engineer. But what Mahood lacked in law enforcement training, he made up for in methodical thinking and obsession. Something about the case refused to let go of him. It wasn't just the tragedy, it was the lack of logic. The conflicting reports, the search areas that never quite made sense. Mahood approached the mystery like a complex engineering problem, breaking it into variables, isolating paths, cross-referencing maps, distances, and time. And then he had a breakthrough. Using the German-language guidebook found inside the family's abandoned van, Mahood tried to reconstruct their most probable route. The booklet outlined a western route through Warm Spring Canyon and over Mengel Pass, eventually passing through the notorious Barker Ranch where Charles Manson and his followers had once hidden. From there, it pointed north, toward the ghost town of Barat and eventually toward the edge of Joshua Tree National Park. Suddenly, their movements made sense. On the morning of July 23rd, the family left their campsite in Hunopa Canyon and headed south to Warm Spring Road. It would have looked promising, well-maintained at first glance, and seemingly connected to the next leg of their journey. But when they reached the Warm Spring camp, there was no one to ask. Just silence and heat. Still, they pressed west toward the cabin in Butte Valley. Again, it was empty. Disappointed but still determined, they took the American flag as a keepsake and moved forward toward Mengel Pass. But that pass, while it appeared navigable on their guidebook map, was in reality impossible for their vehicle. Their final hope was what appeared to be a shortcut, Anvil Canyon, a route they believed would return them to the main valley floor. Faced with two choices, backtrack through punishing terrain they barely survived the first time, or try the shorter way forward. They chose the latter. Where Mahood's theory diverged from official searches was critical. He believed the family didn't go east or north after the van broke down, as rescuers had assumed. Instead, he believed they went south, a direction most search teams had dismissed early on. Conventional search and rescue theory suggests that lost persons try to return to their last known safe location. But what if that assumption had been wrong? Mahood was about to find out, because he was going to test his theory in the field. Tom Mahood had a theory, one that defied conventional search logic. He believed Egbert Rimkus had looked at his map, seen the northern boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center just 8 or 9 miles south, and made a desperate calculation. For a man trying to save his family, a military base might have seemed like salvation. Surely there would be people, water, communication, hope. The map made the terrain between the stranded van and the base seem deceptively manageable. To someone unfamiliar with the brutal reality of Death Valley's landscape, it might have looked like a straight shot, over a few ridges and down into safety. Mahood believed the family spent at least one night at the minivan, as suggested by discarded personal waste and scattered items nearby. Then, locking the doors, they set off east through Anvil Canyon, reaching the site where the now infamous beer bottle was found. From there, Mahood theorized, they turned south, toward what they hoped would be rescue. It was a direction no one had searched thoroughly. Experienced desert trekkers and officials had long dismissed it. No one would go south, they said. It's too dangerous, too remote. But the Germans weren't seasoned desert travelers. They were tourists, with incomplete maps, no radio, and the terrifying drive to save their children. Fueled by hope and fear, they made a choice most professionals would never consider. Armed with this theory, Mahood launched his own expedition in 2009, 13 years after the disappearance. He was joined by Les Walker, and together they began scouring the unforgiving terrain southeast of Goler Wash, about 8 miles from the abandoned vehicle and just 4 miles from the fence marking China Lake's restricted boundary. What they discovered would unravel one of America's most enduring desert mysteries. November 12, 2009. In the rocky silence of the desert, Mahood and Walker found the scattered remains of Cornelia Meyer. Her bones lay across a 150-meter stretch of desolate earth. Her German passport, photo ID, and personal effects confirmed the discovery. Nearby, Les spotted a small toothbrush and a tube of ointment resting in a shallow depression in the dirt. They also uncovered part of a small shoe, either a woman's or a child's, and pages from Cornelia's personal planner, along with business cards from hotels the family had stayed at earlier on their journey. A few feet away, a clear bottle was found, later identified as one of the same Budweiser bottles seen in the family's van. In the days that followed, they located more remains, among them Egbert Rimkus. Exactly where Mahood's theory had predicted. The location was so rugged and hidden that it was no wonder previous searches had missed it entirely. It confirmed what Mahood had believed all along, that the family had made one final, desperate trek south, hoping to reach help, and died trying. There was no conspiracy, no government cover-up, no secret relocation, no sinister plot, just a series of logical decisions, made under extreme stress and based on incomplete information, that led them into a trap with no escape. Later searches uncovered additional bones, presumed to belong to George and little Max. But the desert had stripped away enough that DNA confirmation was impossible. Still, the mystery of the missing German family in Death Valley had, at long last, found its resolution. It was never about foul play or espionage. It was a tragedy of well-meaning intentions, bad maps, and a land that does not forgive mistakes. The story of the Death Valley Germans is more than just a mystery solved. It's a haunting lesson in the limits of human endurance, the power of hope, and the fragile line between adventure and disaster. Egbert Rimkus wanted to show his son the wonder of America. Cornelia Meyer was embracing a journey with the man she loved. George, just 11, was getting his first glimpse of a world beyond his small hometown. And Max, only 4, was simply along for the ride, trusting the grown-ups to keep him safe. They weren't reckless. They weren't naive. They were a family trying to explore. And when their vacation turned into a nightmare, they did what any of us would do. They tried to find a way out. But in Death Valley, sometimes there is no way out. They were walking toward a place they believed would bring salvation. When their minivan became hopelessly stuck in the soft sand, Egbert and Cornelia made a choice, a logical choice, seen through the lens of desperation. A location marked on their map seemed to promise hope. Every decision they made, taken on its own, made sense. But together, those choices became a path to tragedy. Yet in the long shadow of that tragedy stood two unlikely heroes, Tom Mahood and Les Walker. While the professionals moved on, these men refused to let the story end in silence. They weren't family, they weren't law enforcement, but they were relentless. Hikers and thinkers with the resolve to uncover the truth, they dedicated countless hours to poring over evidence, reanalyzing terrain, and trekking into deadly landscapes. They followed rational trails others had dismissed. And thanks to them, a family in Dresden, Germany, who had waited more than a decade for answers, could finally hold a memorial with the painful gift of closure. The mystery that had haunted them for 13 long years had finally been unraveled. They could mourn, they could grieve properly, and perhaps they could begin to heal. In later interviews, Mahood would express frustration with the lack of cooperation from certain agencies. Without their independent effort, he believed the remains might never have been found. Their success, in a place where experts had failed, was a powerful reminder of what determination and fresh thinking can accomplish, especially when dealing with cases long considered unsolvable. But the story is more than a solved mystery. It stands as a chilling reminder of the unforgiving beauty of the American wilderness. Death Valley is breathtaking, but brutal. Each year, tourists underestimate its dangers and overestimate their preparation. Some never return. The lessons are painfully clear. Bring more water and food than you think you'll need. Never venture into rugged terrain without a vehicle built for it. Always inform someone of your intended route and return time. Carry reliable communication devices and know how to use them. And above all, never rely solely on maps, especially those that don't reflect real-time conditions or hidden hazards. The Death Valley Germans have now become part of modern American folklore. Their story passed down not just as a tragedy, but as a cautionary tale, and a testament to the enduring power of hope. Their fate is a solemn reminder that every missing person is more than just a name on a report. They are someone's parent, child, partner. Real people with real families who deserve real answers, no matter how long it takes. The desert may keep its secrets close, but this one finally spoke. And it taught us that sometimes when hope seems gone and answers feel out of reach, the human spirit proves stronger, even than Death Valley itself.